Do you think type of carbohydrates and distribution of carbohydrates could play a big role?
Yes, and that is a separate thing. So there is research, and this is true in all domains, that are like, oh, high carb, low fat diets and moderate carb or lower carb diets have the same effect. Whenever I read these papers that are using high carb, low fat diets, they are eating mostly high fiber, low glycemic index, unprocessed carbs. That is, the types of carbs people don't eat in the real world, right? So I'm not dismissing those studies. But what I'm saying is, in my experience, most people don't eat those foods. So without getting too deep into the woods, have you ever talked much about glycemic index on your podcast? Okay. Yeah. So you know what the glycemic index is, and it's not really very useful. There's something better called the glycemic load, right? Which is the glycemic index times the total number of carbohydrates. So what you find is that, okay, if you have a certain number of carbohydrates, if you lower the glycemic index and basically eat all the carbs that nobody likes, I mean, just, I don't, you see glycemic load comes down by like 40 points. If you just lower carbs or increase fat, it comes down by like 35. So to me, in the real world, I am more a believer in, and a number of youth studies, more recent, have said, look, for PCOS women, 40 to 45% dietary carbohydrates, or potentially lower, is probably the way to go. Because really, it's just that way you can have a moderate dietary fat intake. Dietary fat tends to slow digestion, tends to decrease how quickly carbs are getting into the bloodstream, gives you enough room for protein, and you kind of end up, right back at 30% protein, 40 to 45% carbs, 20 to 25% fat. Like if someone was to ask me what I thought was like the most generic best diet for most people, that'd be it.
Right? Yeah, the most balanced approach. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're a high level athlete training 4 hours a day, you need way more carbs. And if you're severely insulin resistant and inactive, you may need to go full keto. But for the average person, that allows enough carbs, enough food variety. But yeah, certainly lowering, eating more unrefined carbohydrates and fruits and vegetables and things that will never hurt. In my experience, that's not the thing. Again, I've got a very American mentality. That's not what people eat. That's not what most people eat. For me, just lowering the carbs tends to do most of the heavy lifting. And I think tends to basically have the same. So, and I think all of these things, what they add up to, because if you think about it, right, what insulin resistance represents is when you eat carbs, especially either a lot of carbs or very rapidly digesting carbs, blood sugar goes up, insulin goes up, that causes problems. Blood sugar goes down. Your blood sugar is doing this all day. That can drive appetite. That can affect mood. That can affect any number of things for women. Whereas when you balance this all out, by having enough protein, which helps to control appetite and keep blood sugar stable, having moderate dietary fat, which helps with a number of things, with moderate carbs, you start to smooth all that out. And I think this addresses, in a very long answer, the fact that PCOS women have higher dropout rates, but I think a lot of that is because the dietary setups and the lifestyle modifications are not being tailored to their specific metabolic state, psychological state, personality, behavior, lifestyle. Right? There's a paper way back when, I must have read it 15 years ago, and it was titled "The Optimal Diet for the Treatment of Metabolic Syndrome." Right? This is in the early days of that. And it said exactly what I just said. They did recommend lower protein. Protein can raise insulin, but and they were like, yeah, you're better off. You should moderate carbs to 40 to 45% and raise fat. And I'm like, it's the same story. For someone who is insulin resistant, unless you can get them to eat nothing but fruits and vegetables all day, which they won't do, most people won't do, moderating carbs addresses and if that lowers insulin, which lowers androgen levels, which helps eliminate some of it, because testosterone drives appetite. It's part of why men eat more than women. You can lower those testosterone levels. Maybe that helps appetite be in better control. Maybe, and it takes about 3 to 6 months as women see improvements in, like I said, oily skin, acne, body hair. That improves self-image or self-worth. And again, I'm just talking about, I don't want women to say that that's not what you should tie we're just talking about the way the world works, right? If that has these knockoff benefits to all the other effects, to me, that increases the potential for adherence. If activity, for a lot of people, doing daily activity helps them adhere to their diet. For others, it can make them go, I earned the milkshake, that thing. But for many, they tie those two together.